We welcome Dr. Michael Seitz to the show. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you.
Did you have a nice weekend?
I did. Rather busy.
Yes. Let's jump right in with our icebreaker question. What is your favorite superpower?
I would say it's the ability to see things from a different perspective.
Okay, tell more about that.
So typically as we go through our days and everything, stuff comes around, we observe it, a person, a thing, an activity, an event.
Yeah.
And to observe it and then to just see it from different points of view, like what is that person experiencing, or if it's a machine, how else can something be done? Just instinctively being able to observe from, 40,000 feet. You're just able to see the same thing, but with a different view.
I think that is one of the most important skills for continuing into the 21st century, because in a connected world, we have to interact with people whose perspectives are very different from ours now, and to be able to see their perspectives and maybe say, I don't agree with that perspective necessarily,
Absolutely.
but I see how a sensible person could feel that way.
Exactly.
I think that is so important.
And it can be hard to do. We have biases, conditioning.
Sure. Yeah.
So to be able to just get away from that, even if it's just briefly, that's where opportunities lie, I feel.
I think one of the biggest little pieces of progress we've made as a society is that everyone now understands that they themselves have bias. I think even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, a lot of people would have said, everyone has bias, except me, of course.
It would be unnatural not to have bias.
Right. No, we all do. Sorry, go ahead.
Prejudice is part of life. Right?
Yes.
It's actually survival. We have to have it, otherwise we couldn't survive, in my opinion.
I think that makes sense. I think that rings true. That rings true. Give us 60 seconds on your road so far, your career path.
Oh boy. So at school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a geologist, a marine biologist. I grew up in South Africa.
Right.
So with lots of love nature.
Yeah.
And finally decided I'd do mechanical engineering because it would give me a good technical grounding. I enjoyed tinkering with stuff. Not tinkering as in, taking watches apart, just enjoyed systems, devices, people's behavior. And engineering gave me a great foundation to basically have something to build off. I didn't actually want to be an engineer, and I never was. And ended up doing well, going to doctorate program while at the same time already beginning my first businesses.
Yes.
Got into orthopedics, biomechanics by accident.
That's
into metal design.
You've had a fascinating course. Let's back up for a moment. So you mentioned that you grew up in South Africa. How many in your family?
Just my brother and I.
Okay.
He's younger.
Okay. What was your very first job?
I worked in a bakery and mainly did breakfasts in the bakery, which taught me how tough it is to serve breakfast. It's the worst meal of the day to serve because
why is that?
Well, the kitchen isn't really open, so you have to do most of the work yourself. So you've got to keep the coffee going, get the toast going, maybe fry some eggs.
Right.
People are ordering small quantities relative, a couple of bucks, and so the tips suck.
Oh, yeah, that
so
makes
you're
sense.
running around like crazy, people in a hurry.
Right.
So it's when it comes to service work, it's one of the hardest.
Makes sense.
Breakfast.
That makes sense. I had to.
So
I only had to make
breakfast.
I only had to make coffee for 2 this morning, and I almost messed that up. So,
no, it's good.
So here we are. What was your greatest challenge as a child?
2 things actually. Firstly, for a long time I was able to see ideas quite clearly. They were obviously an idea and a perspective. And so I used to come across quite a lot as a know-it-all.
Oh.
Which causes problems with friends who are maybe not getting into stuff the way I was getting into stuff.
Right.
Like I would get in really deep very quickly as I could. So that kind of isolated me a little bit.
I see.
You kind of almost intimidate people. would. So that was tricky.
Right.
And also not being very social. I didn't really party too much.
Yeah. Me neither.
It was kind of, I wouldn't call it lonely, but it was, grew up young.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wouldn't really call it a challenge. It was different.
Sure. That makes sense. Now, and your parents, what were they doing? How did that impact you?
So my parents were workaholics. They came from Namibia, actually, which is where I was born.
Okay.
Very, very poor background. And my dad lost his dad as, a very young guy. So they really, really struggled. My dad put himself through school after hours, after work. So he worked a lot. He was a banker.
Right.
And my mom worked in the bank, but they hated their work. But at that stage, that was the best work they could find with education. So my dad studied banking and accounting, and he didn't like it. He wanted to be an engineer,
right,
and a business owner. But that was really not his thing. Although he dreamt of that all the time, it wasn't.
We talked a little bit about this offline. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So he was very smart with a banking background. He was really good at financial stuff. He knew how to set up businesses. He was a hard enough worker. But when the going got tough, he became blue. He was the glass became half empty.
Oh, okay.
And every new startup business goes through periods where you have tremendous self-doubt. What were you thinking? Financial problems, blah, blah, blah.
I know that feeling.
It's not a question of putting on rose-colored glasses. It's being able to take that in, assess it, get some help, but always be driven to solving problems, seeing that you can get beyond it. When you hit a roadblock, there's a way around it. You've just got to. But if you go into slight panic mode, if you get very emotional about that, you kind of shut down a little bit. And that's what he typically did.
Jim Collins talks about the paradox between accepting the brutal reality of where you are, but maintaining your unwavering belief that you can get where you want to go.
Absolutely.
And that dichotomy, I think, is maybe as you say, maybe the biggest challenge of entrepreneurship.
Well, that's what makes you get to the finish line. And the thing is, in business, it's not like a marathon where there is a course and you just got to stay the course.
Yeah.
In business, you've got to stay the course when it's the right one, but you may have to adjust. And so it's a little bit like driving, rather. You hit a roadblock, you got to find a new road, you got to reroute, but not lose your destination in the process. Right. And not quit, run out of gas.
Yeah, pivot or persevere, but even pivoting is persevering.
Absolutely.
In a way.
And when you pivot, you got to have your senses about you, because that is a very dangerous thing to do, is when you pivot.
Yeah.
Because that's where you can go off a cliff.
No question. We talked a little bit about this a moment ago, but what led you to pursue so many different corners of the business world? We talked about orthopedics, thermal technologies, real estate.
Right. I went all over the map.
Yeah.
Essentially because I am an observer of the world.
Yeah.
And a thinker.
Yeah.
So you see something, and feelings, of course. Feelings we can't get rid of.
Right, yeah.
So in the journey, for instance, I got into orthopedics. I was in South Africa. I was part of an engineering program where I was nominated as the top engineer in South Africa.
Right.
And I had to make slides for a major presentation to the media and everything.
Okay.
And there was a guy who was developing, in those days, slides had to be developed, before that, giving away my age here a little bit. The guy's name was Vusi Shongwe, and he came to me and he said, you engineers, you build these buildings, you cars, airplanes, but he was disabled. He'd had polio as a kid.
Okay.
And he said, but you can't help a guy like me. And I said, what? Well, what's wrong? And he was wearing a brace.
Yeah.
And he was getting pressure sores and things because he was paralyzed. Half his body was paralyzed
and
in a brace. And I looked and I thought, wow, this there must be a better answer here. And so just by observing him, listening to him, looking at his condition and asking him a few questions, I thought, absolutely, this has to be rethought from a different paradigm.
Yes.
And not having come from that field at all, it gave me a chance to think about how I would solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it got me really thinking about it, which is part of the philosophy of my life, is I under-research when I start. To me, you observe a situation, a problem, an opportunity, and we tend to then immediately get out the book, see what everybody else has done, so that we can adapt it and get an evolution of that going. And I kind of go the different way. I go, wow, this is a problem. How would I solve it?
Right.
And once you've formulated, you've researched the essence of it, not the solutions to it, you can create a solution. And at that point, you go and look at what other people have done.
Right.
Because then you've got your thoughts, which are now novel, as it were.
Right.
And you may discover, wow, I thought of something that the other guys who've been kind of down the track on the railway tracks didn't think of. And that's where innovation comes.
This is beautiful. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about in the coffee room, where the difference between entrepreneurs, I think, are so tempted to think in terms of supply side. It's a little bit self-aggrandizing. There are kinder ways to describe it, but one version of it is, how can I, as an entrepreneur, come up with this great idea that's going to change the world? And instead of that, I think the best thing for entrepreneurs, and Lean Startup preaches this method as well. As you just said, you have to understand the problem. You have to understand the economic way of describing it is, you have to understand the demand.
Exactly.
And entrepreneurs frequently don't do a good job of that, which is really understandable, because entrepreneurship is often such a lonely pursuit.
Absolutely. It is a lonely, that's where I started. When you are thinking about things, especially if you're out of the box a little bit, depending on who you're speaking to, you will get a lot of encouragement or no encouragement. But the encouragement is, oh, you're so great, you're doing something over there.
Right.
So it's a strange place to be.
Right. And you have to be careful with praise.
Oh, absolutely.
Because everyone will tell you, oh, yeah, I'd buy that. But you don't really know.
No.
You don't really know. What has cued you to move to something else? Like you just talked about your conversation that you had with the gentleman who was disabled. What are the other things that have sort of pinged your mind to say, okay, now this?
So again, this is important in my life philosophy, is opportunity comes at the strangest times in the strangest forms.
Yeah.
So it's essentially walking through life with your eyes open, observing. Everything is interesting.
Yeah, yes.
And at the worst possible time, usually, some opportunity will appear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, one can't grab everything, so there's some filtering that has to go on. But the next adventure comes along usually when you least expect it.
Mm.
You've just got to be observant. You've got to be vigilant.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the amazing stuff happens. And you've just got to be conscious of it.
Yeah.
So let's say, for instance, I was in a business where we did metals and we did metal spraying, very industrial.
Yeah.
And then I, at the same time, was talking to someone in a plane, and we're talking about the stock market. And he mentioned something just in talking where it was, wow, that is a gap. So there you go from, you have a fully running business, and suddenly something strikes you, and you put it away and you go away and you work on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a little hobby, and you start finding out something.
Yeah.
And you don't go with the idea, I'm going to make millions out of this. You just start working on it because it has some potential for development. It's recognizing that something is relevant and has value.
Right. And that there's a problem with it.
So to me, solving a problem is value.
Right.
And somebody wants it is that it's relevant.
Right.
And relevant may be out of time, right? So you could invent the computer 100 years too early and it's not relevant at that point.
Yeah, true.
But with the right timing, everything becomes a very relevant in many aspects.
Right.
What you're bringing to the market or what you're developing has relevance.
What's in all of your, in all of the companies that you developed and all of the conversations that you've had, what was the best moment where you felt like, now, obviously the conversation that you had with the disabled gentleman, that was what put you on the path. But what do you think was the best moment where you thought, that's why I do this?
So I don't really cognitively go down that road. So
okay.
Not at all. You kind of start working and just be aware of the reactions you get. So polling. I do a lot of polling.
Okay.
I love to talk to people
Sure.
about the idea.
Yeah.
And to your point earlier, be careful that people are flattering you or they don't want to say a bad thing.
Right.
Speak to people in an unguarded way.
Mm-hmm.
And so you learn to ask questions in a way that they don't feel like they need to give you an answer you want to hear. Those are the worst answers. They feel good.
That's true. Yeah, they feel great. Feel great. Of course I'd buy that.
Of course I'd buy that. Yeah. So just, so developing a skill of how to ask questions, how to poll people. Yeah. But again, being cautious. The people you poll are not designers, or they're not going to tell you what to do. Right. It's just to get a feel on how you're presenting it, how you've shaped the problem.
Yeah.
So it's tricky, but developing good conversations is very, very important to know whether it's relevant, something is relevant.
Sure. Yeah. There's definitely, there's a science to it, but I think it's more of an art.
I think so too. Yeah. But you got to be cognitively aware of what you're doing as well.
Right. Let's talk about Blue Sky Global. It's an international company that operates in North America, South America, Australia, and beyond.
Everywhere.
Do you have any specific stories about learning from applying something internationally that has worked in one country? How do you mitigate the mistakes that maybe other business owners have made?
So the thing that I've done, because I've been international since day one, being in South Africa started, whether it was Japan or India or Germany or whatever. So there's tremendous cultural difference.
Right.
The one thing that's universal around the world is technology.
Yeah.
So an iPhone will work in the US, it'll work in Japan. So it's to know what is universal about what you're offering and what needs to be adjusted culturally.
Yeah.
To differentiate those two. So when, for instance, you go to India, robustness, it's a different environment from Japan.
Yeah.
So you've got to adapt certain aspects of the technology, but really be sensitive to the local cultures and be kind and respectful. Don't bring your culture to the country you're going into. Rather it's just like designing in the basics.
Yeah.
You have to bring something that's relevant to them.
Right. Yeah.
And so being sensitive of how they are, how they behave, and you don't have to research it in a book. You can just observe once again. Right. When you speak to somebody, see how they, interact with you.
Right.
And mirror that a little bit. There's no harm in mirroring. That's how you learn.
Right. Right. It's sort of just like adding another dimension to the conversational mix, perhaps.
Absolutely. When I was in Finland, there was a totally different approach to going down to Italy. It's night and day. Uh-huh. But again, you arrive knowing what you're going to bring, which is your foundation, which is universal. Mm-hmm. If I design an alloy, if I bring an alloy, it's the same alloy regardless. But how it's presented, where the value sits for those folks is different. But you've got to observe that. And I wouldn't say you've got to be patient. You've got to be hungry to observe it, but you've got to be patient. You've got to really listen. Mm-hmm. If there's a lot of silence, then, have a look at everybody's silent. Are they waiting for you to talk? Are they not? It's really about being adaptable. When you go global, yes. Don't force your system in on people.
Yes, that is the challenge. Let's talk about scalability. When just strictly in terms of its own thing, what is the best advice you would give to yourself prior to now about scalability? How did you learn to do that well?
Scalability is critical. It's such a broad question.
Right.
I would say for me, the key aspect is everything that I design. My first question is scalability. In other words, if I design something, it's got to be simplified, always simplified in order to scale. To me, working a design to the point where somebody says, oh, that's easy.
Right.
Now you have something that's scalable.
Right.
So keep working the problem, until you've dumbed it down, and then things are more scalable.
Right.
If you have a very complicated widget, it's much harder to scale.
Right. Okay.
So I put all my time into making things simple.
Yeah. That makes sense. Where did you get your inspiration regarding mushroom houses?
that kind of just pops out of my head. So I'm kind of romantic in my, artist romantic. And also very symbolic. So to me, it was a case of seeing something. I could immediately see the picture in my mind.
Yeah.
3D, how to do it.
It's rare.
And it's it's just a gift, right? You see, wow, I know what I'm going to do there.
Right.
And combining different materials, different geometries. So it's really an engineer being an artist, being able to do it.
Yeah.
But just free form, just saying there are no rules. Yeah. Again, I'm not an architect, so I'm able to just build stuff because I haven't Googled nothing. There are many common thematics. You can Google aspects of it, but because I'm bringing it out of my head, it doesn't exist.
It's like Athena springing full grown from the mind of Zeus.
But it is. If you've got an artist, you say, here's a canvas, and put a person in a room and say, just paint something. That's how it is.
Okay.
Just paint something.
Beautiful. If you had to pinpoint the most unexpectedly critical component to developing a successful business model across all of your industries, and maybe it plays back to something that we've already covered, but what would it be?
Cash.
Oh, not what I expected. Not the answer I expected.
Cash will kill you.
Right.
You can have the best whatever. You have got to, as a business owner.
Right.
Cash has a terrible effect on your emotions. When you run out of cash, when you got to do stuff, if you haven't managed it well, you've got to feel poor while you're delivering it because it makes you smart, makes you preserve your treasure.
Yeah.
If you run out of cash or if you go low on cash, you'll get it's like driving your car. If you start running out of gas, you stop looking at the scenery, you're worried, am I going to make it to my destination?
That's right.
And that'll preoccupy. So to me, cash is like the gas in your car. Be careful.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a destroyer, as far as I'm concerned, of the ability to think, to be courageous, and to survive.
Right. And of course, the evolutionary step is resist the temptation to add things that will eat your cash.
Absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, you've got to behave as though you're poor. It makes you very smart with money.
Right.
The profits, the success of the business will kind of take care of itself if you do the basics right.
Yeah.
So you don't set out to, I'm starting this business, I can drive a Mercedes or a fancy car. It's a question that'll come. And when it does come, you don't even notice it came. It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, your whole focus has to be about what you're creating, its value, and making sure you have enough gas in your car to get there.
Yeah.
Keep working it.
Can I tell you a secret?
Mm-hmm.
I drive a crappy old Prius, an old Toyota Prius. And one of the reasons that I still drive that car is because it helps me never forget when I was starving in Los Angeles. Not literally starving, but broke and no idea how I was going to pay the next month's rent. I never want to lose sight of that.
That is amazing. And that is, if I had to give the single lesson to anybody who's been somewhat successful, is what you've just said. Keep your feet on the ground.
Yeah.
And remember, because that's when you're at your best. But you don't want to get to the point of being panicked.
Right.
Because then you'll become dumb.
It's another dichotomy.
Exactly.
Another one. Where do you anticipate your next entrepreneurial endeavor will take you?
Where will my next one be? Probably into the world of apps.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. Into that, because I have a whole lot in my back pocket. That is an area that there's a lot of innovation possibilities. I believe still it's just an opening field.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Rapid fire. What do you consider your most valuable failure?
Whoa. Failures are something that happen on a daily basis. So there's so many. It's like, which is the most valuable one? Probably when I was doing this orthopedic business.
Okay.
I was an engineer in the medical business, and it was very, very hard to survive financially because I couldn't get paid because I wasn't part of the medical council. And in fact, as my technology started getting into the medical world, guys used to say, oh, he's a doctor, but he's not a medical doctor. He's a scam. Blah. So I felt illegitimate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, I just felt like an imposter.
Yeah.
I was an imposter in a sense, and I got out of it because I just didn't want to live that negative thing where I continuously had to fight some basics.
Right.
I didn't want to get a medical degree. Didn't have the time for that.
Right.
So it was orthopedic innovations in a way was a failure.
Okay.
But it kind of also showed me that where you position yourself in business, sometimes you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's part of something you have to recognize as well.
Yeah.
That's very, very important also to know when to quit because you're just not on the right road.
What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you? Biggest misunderstanding?
That I'm a know-it-all, that I think I know it, that, you know, I feel like an imposter inside. I'm very confident because I need to be, but confidence is sometimes confused with arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
Big difference.
Yeah.
So it creates a mean spirit sometimes when people think you're arrogant, and you know, so that's a pity.
Yeah.
But I project myself as being confident and knowing everything and blah blah blah. But
right,
it's not true.
I'm guessing you're an introvert.
Yes.
Okay.
Strong introvert.
Yes.
Even though I'm extroverted in my behavior, somebody said,
right. I think entrepreneurship probably comes most naturally to introverts in many ways.
You have to, because you have to go away and reflect and observe and observe.
That's been one of the hardest parts for me because I just want to go talk. Like for me, getting out of the building, that's one of the easy parts. I'm like, please get me out of the building. Let me go talk to people. Yes. But in terms of then going away and applying everything when it's chaos and it's time to figure out, okay, what do we need to do next? I freeze up. That's when I freeze up. That's when I'm like, just give me action items. Give me something to do. And it's when it's in like brainstorming and, you know, just pitching stuff and throwing it at the wall. That's where a lot of entrepreneurs really thrive. Not me. I'm not that way. I'm very uncomfortable.
But you can surround yourself with those people.
Yes.
So,
yes.
You know that weakness or that challenge.
Yeah.
So that's when you bring in help.
Yes. Yes. If
and
you could,
fun then.
Yes. Well, it's definitely a little more fun at that point. If you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be?
This is going to be a strange answer. I would say I would like to have a therapist, somebody who can, I have trouble seeing myself in certain situations, the mirror.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes useful to know how you are projecting yourself into the world.
Yeah.
That's my biggest blind spot. I'm so not self-aware.
Yeah.
And so that would be very interesting for me to have mentoring and on how to present oneself, because presentation is important.
Right.
It's unusual, but
no, that's a great answer. What is the most important advice you would give to yourself exactly 5 years ago?
Don't invest in the stock market.
Oh, okay.
That's very important philosophically. If you're entrepreneurial, do not invest in other people's ideas where you have no input. If you're entrepreneurial, invest in yourself.
Yeah.
We seem to feel it's much safer to put something somewhere else.
Right. Well, and it is safer, but we're not talking about safety now.
We're talking about investment.
Exactly. A couple of great Tim Ferriss questions. What is the book you've given most often as a gift or just recommended to others? What is your favorite book?
Okay, so I'm not a big reader at all, but I would say not at all. Again, because my philosophy is to observe and to talk to people.
Right.
And then I read a lot, but I don't read books. So I read for information snippets.
Okay.
But a book that I did read and that I think is essential, historical reading, is called The Prize.
Okay.
And it tells a story about oil. And oil energy has been so central to everything that's happened. It just gives a perspective that most people didn't realize, how something like energy and oil has driven decisions, politics, developments, changed the world.
No doubt.
So something as fundamental as oil, that book beautifully writes the history of oil.
Right. Well, if you just look at something like fracking and how much it's even just a new method of discovering oil has completely changed how business is being done, even in the last 7 or 8 years.
Absolutely. Opportunities, the whole political landscape has changed.
if you could have a billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
Gratitude. Gratitude changes everything.
Yeah. And
gratitude also leads to understanding what we have.
Yeah.
And from that, it's amazing. So I would feel gratitude.
Yeah. Okay. We end each session with good bull. This is an opportunity to recognize someone else for something good or great they have done. Do you have anyone you would like to send some good bull?
This is a bizarre answer. So I'm South African. I'm a US citizen now. And this is bizarre. Anyway, I would do it Donald Trump.
Oh, interesting.
Why? Because I was not a supporter of his at all. I refused to watch his show because I didn't particularly care for his personality.
Right.
But he became president and kind of was forced to get to know a little bit, see him from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And it's hard sometimes to see him from different. But I feel we're very lucky with how it's evolved. And never mind all the politics around it. If you were an observer from another planet and you were saying just effectiveness, change, possibilities, we're in a good place right now. I don't think we really realize that there's so much noise. It's really insane, and there's so much emotion and
that is true.
And criticism and bad behavior and blah, blah, blah. You can analyze it from multiple ways. But if you really step back, we have opportunities that are just phenomenal. A lot of them are circumstantial, but we're in a good place. So I'm kind of grateful. So a man that I wouldn't say I despise, but I wasn't particularly respectful of.
Yes.
Changed my view.
Huh.
And I would never have imagined it possible.
Yes. I know what you mean. I feel like the optics of Trump's presidency and the way he comports himself and so forth I continue to think it's really problematic.
So do I.
But
it's a rope-a-dope. I'm starting to think it's all rope-a-dope. Muhammad Ali.
You might be right.
Because when I really step back, it's hard to criticize. When he pulled out of certain, let's say the Paris Accord,
right.
If you're I'm interested in dust collectors and cleaning the environment, so it's very close to my heart. And he pulled out of that. But I have to remind myself that I thought the Paris Accord was a joke because the major polluters of the world were not present at the table. They got a free pass, which was understandable why, pragmatically. They were in manufacturing. They produced the world's goods in manufacturing. They were growing from third to first world in a rapid rate. So they need energy, right? So they burn coal like heck. But India and China are huge emitters of CO2, and they were out of that. So we were all feeling happy. We're doing something, we care about the planet. But it's all nonsense because the main perpetrators aren't in the group. So when he yanked us out, it allowed people to go back to the table and think about that. But it was so politically crazy that it hasn't really happened.
Yeah.
But it needs to happen. But at least he's kind of said, no, this is nonsense.
Yeah.
So the whole way it played out was ugly in a way and looks anti-environmental, but it's actually pro-environment.
Yeah.
As bizarre as that sounds, it's actually pro-environment. I remember one comment saying, we're going to give the leadership to the Chinese if the US pulls out. And I was thinking, well, that's great. They're the biggest polluter on the planet.
Bring it, get them in.
Let them be the leaders.
Right.
They're the ones that are actually doing the most damage. Circumstantially, they're not trying to kill the planet. They just got,
it happens to be how it works out.
So let them be the leaders.
Sure.
We don't have to be the leaders because we want to be boss. I'd love the Chinese to lead the road to cleaning up the air.
Yes. Brilliant.
So, good for him.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We should be grateful.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Seitz, thank you so much for your time.
I
appreciate you coming to speak with us.
Thank you. It was great fun.
Thank you for watching. We appreciate your support. Drop us a like below and feel free to leave a comment if you wish. We appreciate positivity and constructive feedback. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on our latest episodes and bonus content. You can also take us on the road using your favorite podcast listening app. We have those linked below. If you'd like to know more about Mays Business School or our guests, visit mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Talk with you soon.